The show that interviews people from the past.
What were you thinking?
I don't know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to What You Were Thinking. Tonight, our guest is one of the most famous persons in the Bible. Some would say God amongst men. He was probably the most noted, stubborn man of the Bible. He ruled in cruelty, prejudice, and with the heaviness of hand. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to What You Were Thinking, the Lord of the Nile, son of Ra, Fulton of the sun, the Great One, Lord of two lands, Pharaoh, King of Egypt. Ladies and gentlemen, Ramses II, King of Egypt. Pharaoh, welcome to What You Were Thinking. Thank you for letting us do this prestigious interview.
It is my understanding to show here is to reveal the events of the past and bring them into details into the present. To tell the events and circumstances and feelings of the individuals being interviewed, as to enlighten people as to what happened, the lives of those involved, and so many years ago. I, too, as Pharaoh, King of Egypt, will do my best to reveal these events in accordance with that mandate and in accordance with the word of your God. For one immutable thing that I, Pharaoh, did learn is your God is God.
Amen. Indeed he is. Pharaoh, what is your given geological title and your position as Pharaoh? What did it entail?
My geological title is a Methathan. I procured my throne from my father, Ramses I. I was the first sovereign of the 19th dynasty of Egypt from BC 1830 or 1330 to 1340. The title Ramses means great house. As Pharaoh, I was king of Egypt. To my people, I was a god. So I had to conduct myself as a god, full of wisdom, power, and authority. I was an Egyptian, not only her king and representative, also all the surrounding nations were Egyptian. Every form of business and law passed before my authority. I was supreme, and I was held in regards as a god, king of Egypt.
So basically you were the man in charge.
Yes.
Historical facts show us that Egypt held Israel in bondage for over 400 years.
Yes, Israel was brought into bondage some 300 years or so before my father, Ramses I, took the throne.
So under the reign of your father and his predecessors, Israel was put into bondage.
Yes, it seems that my grandfather, M.S. August, from the Hebrew slave named Joseph, he allowed Joseph's people to dwell in Goshen in Egypt, for there was at that time a great famine in the land. So because of Joseph, my grandfather saved Israel's alive. Over the years, the Egyptian people saw how beneficial the Hebrews of Israel were. So my father, Ramses I, set them to hard labor. He made them the slaves of Egypt to build his treasured city.
During your father's reign as sovereign of Egypt, there was a prophecy foretold of a deliverer of Israel, one who would come and deliver Israel out of bondage. Did he ever appear?
Indeed it did. Because of the prophecy, my father ordained all the firstborn of Israel to be put to death. He knew that the promised deliverer was yet to come. So he ordained the death. And he knew that the promised deliverer was yet to come. So he ordained the death of all the newborn males, children to die. A preventive measure to protect Israel from losing such a vital workforce. But alas, one was saved alive. Unwarily, my father's sister found a Hebrew child and raised him as her own. His name was called Moses, for she drew him from the water. He had been hid in a basket in the reeds. And when Moses grew up to manhood, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. So Moses killed the Egyptian. My father then, out of anger of his heart, sought to kill Moses. So Moses fled to Midian and stayed there until all who sought his life were dead. At this point, he decided to return to Egypt and free the Israelites.
So Pharaoh, why did you not choose to kill Moses?
By the time Moses returned to Israel, had grown used to the fact that they were the slaves of Egypt. There were many taskmasters over them. By the time of my reign as Pharaoh, so I determined that Moses was no more a threat to me or Egypt. He was but one man. He would only become a mockery, not only to the Egyptians, but also to the Israelites. No, Moses possessed no threat to me, for I was king of Egypt, and I could crush him in an instant. Besides, I thought it may be interesting to see just how Moses would attempt to free Israel from the grip of the hands of Pharaoh.
When Moses finally came to you and asked you to let the people of Israel go into the wilderness and worship their God, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, what were you thinking?
I was thinking that instead I would just increase their workload. If they had more work, then they'd had less time to wander to worship their God. After all, they were slaves of Egypt. Who were those people to demand such a thing? Who ever heard of giving a slave a holiday? Oh, Pharaoh, just let us go one time to worship our God, and we'll come back right back. Sure you would. No, my people, my thoughts was to load them down with more work. That way they would be too tired to go and worship their God, let alone rebel against Egypt. No, I made them make bricks without supplying the straw to bind the bricks together. The Hebrews had to go out and find their own straw, and the number of the bricks had to be the same. That kept them from some time. Besides, I knew the Hebrews would blame Moses, and they did.
So Pharaoh, it's safe to say you weren't going to let Israel go?
One could have carved that in stone.
So Pharaoh, king of Egypt, when you saw the signs Moses did, the staff turning into a serpent, the water turning into blood, did you think not then that Moses' God was God?
No, not at all. I saw it as a cheap magician's trick. My magicians did so also, just a cheap magician trick, that's all it was.
Did you also think this with the plague of frogs?
And again, my magicians brought up frogs as well. Just tricks of illusion is all they were.
So still you would not let the people go.
Of course not. All the time that Moses was trying to show me his God was God, when my magicians could copy all that he did. I think not. I decided then to show Moses that I was God in Egypt, not his God, not the God of Israel.
And so did the plagues continue?
Yes, they did. Our land became infested with lice. Then came swarms of flies. Then the animals were infected with the disease, murrain and rendered pest. And then the people of Egypt were stricken with boils. By this time, my magicians said they could no longer match the things that transpired. They began to say that the God of Moses was God, especially when they themselves fell victim to the boils. Each time a different plague came, I would promise Moses he and Israel could go into the wilderness and worship their God, if first he would have his God remove the plagues of Moses did so. And each time the plagues were stayed. So who was the smarter? The plagues were stayed, and Israel was still enslaved.
So Pharaoh, you broke and kept breaking your promises to Moses that you would let Israel go?
Of course. Why would I, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, God among men, why would I let Israel go? They were slaves. Now listen carefully. They were my slaves, slaves of Egypt. Of course I wasn't going to let them go, not for any reason.
What then did Moses do? Obviously you were not keeping your word. What then transpired?
Moses prayed to his God, and hail mingled with fire fell. It killed men and beasts alike who were not in the sheltered place. Crops burned, trees were consumed and broken, but yet the land of Goshen was spared, and so were the Israelites. I continued to refuse Israel's release.
And did Moses' God continue to afflict Egypt?
Oh yes, his God sent locusts by the thousands. They destroyed every living plant in Egypt. Then he sent a darkness that could be felt, but yet there was light in the houses of the Hebrews in Goshen. Finally, I decided to let the Hebrews go, and I told Moses so. I told him if I ever see his face again, I would kill him.
But Pharaoh, just to make sure you wouldn't change your mind again, God brought one more plague, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Moses' God destroyed all the firstborn of Egypt. The firstborn of man and beast all died. Even my very own son. The Hebrews marked the threshold with blood as a sign unto their God that they were Hebrew, and they did that so that they would be passed over. However, we the Egyptians had no such protection.
So Pharaoh, king of Egypt, after Moses' God smote all the firstborn of Egypt, were you then ready to let the people go?
More than that, we allowed Israel to spoil Egypt. We said, take whatever you want and just go. And that is exactly what they did. About 600,000, not including children and mixed multitudes, left with them. Little did I know that all this time the gods of Moses had hardened my heart, so that he could show his signs and wonders, so all the people would know he was the true God. And Israel marched out of Egypt.
Now Pharaoh, even after Israel had departed Egypt, you decided again not to let them go. You went after them with your army to bring them back, did you not? Pharaoh, king of Egypt, what were you thinking?
Well, it wasn't just me. It was also all the Egyptians. We thought about what we had done. How could the city be built without the Hebrews? We certainly were not capable of such a task. We had grown soft, and whereby Israel was strong and trained in the trades of which we were nothing anymore. So yes, we decided to go and bring them back.
And this proved to be a mistake on your part also, didn't it?
Well, yes, I thought Moses' God was out of tricks. Apparently he was not. He set a pillar of fire and a cloud between my forces and Israel. Moses' God had set us up. He opened the sea of Israel, and Israel walked through on dry ground. When we pursued Israel, had already crossed. The forces were about mid-center when God sent the waters back to their place. My army was drowned, horses and all. Moses' God, the God of Israel, is God.
Pharaoh, king of Egypt, thank you for being our guest tonight on what you were thinking. Allowing us to interview your story has brought us a little more light to us. Pharaoh, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand for Pharoah, king of Egypt. Time of the oppression and the Pharaoh in power at the time of the Exodus are not really known for certain. What is known is that during the oppression, the Pharaoh in power was either Moses or Ames, whoever you choose to pronounce it, or Ramses the First. The Pharaoh in power during the Exodus was either Ramses II or his second son, Menephtah. This is as close as history can evaluate. According to Exodus chapter 4, verse 19, we learn that all those who sought to kill Moses were dead. Therefore, we know a new Pharaoh sat upon the throne of Egypt during the Exodus. It is also noteworthy to realize that the lessons learned from the career of Pharaoh teaches us that there are men whom the most signal judgments do not affect, so as to cause any lasting repentance. It is also important to note that each of the plagues, and even Pharaoh himself, were objects of worship by Egyptians. God had to show his dominance over all the gods of Egypt, including Pharaoh. The duration of the plagues, from what we can surmise, is that it took many months for all the plagues to be performed. Each can be dated by the facts surrounding the story because of the Nile, the crops, the time of the insects. All designed by God to show that the gods of Egypt did not compare to his might and strength. The initial end was that the gods and idols of Egypt were proved to be false. Jehovah executed judgment upon Egypt, for God said Israel, who was kept in captivity, was his firstborn, and in recompense he would destroy the firstborn of Egypt for enslaving Israel, showing God's power to be all supreme over all the idols, gods, kings, sacred animals, including the land itself of the nation of Egypt, governed by the Pharaoh, the God King. Thank you.